What's going on, everybody? We got Steelers, Browns, under the lights, on the road, primetime football. Sounds like we may even get a little bit of snow, some participation in the area. But we got some football weather on deck, man. I'm really excited to talk about this matchup. Even on a short week, I wanted to make sure that I got in a couple games of film just before recording the preview so I could give you guys some good insights, some good nuggets to take with you before we get into this game. So I hope that you all enjoyed these previews as much as I do, just putting the show notes together for it and everything. Obviously, the short week makes it pretty difficult on me, as well as obviously the teams playing in this one. But Pittsburgh currently 3 seed in the AFC playoff picture. Try to keep you guys posted on this as well. I'm sure most of y'all are paying attention to it, but trying to keep pace with Buffalo, Kansas City. Good news is, they still got that matchup with Kansas City coming up on Christmas. Obviously, still trying to fend off Baltimore, who they'll see later on down the road in the regular season again as well. But just as always, please make sure that you like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, drop me a comment with your predictions for tonight's game as well. And if you missed it, we did 2 film rooms this week. We broke down some of the defensive stuff that they did to slow down Lamar Jackson's Ravens offense. Then also did a 30-minute film room on their third down struggles on offense from last week as well. So if you're looking for more content on that, just consider becoming a channel member for even more film rooms, additional perks, things like that. Allows you to get just a little bit more insight, doing some stuff over there that I think a lot of you guys will probably enjoy. But with that being said, let's talk about this AFC North showdown, starting with the injuries per usual. So the Steelers are actually pretty healthy coming into this game, which is a good thing. Really no injury concerns. Obviously, we knew that Alex Highsmith was going to be out in this one. Sounds like he may be able to come back in about a week or two. But the Steelers will have Nick Herbig, who led the team in pressures last week with 5, had a pretty solid game. Not only had the forced fumble on Derrick Henry early in the Ravens game, but also shot into the backfield on that 2-point conversion, kind of made Lamar take a more difficult track to the perimeter, allowed Joey Porter Jr. come up and make the tackle. They end up winning the game, stopping them on that 2-point conversion, winning the game. So I was pretty impressed with Herbig last week. I thought he played pretty solid, but this is another good opportunity for him. And obviously Preston Smith working into the mix as well. The only other player that's been declared out is Corey Trice. Trice was actually a full participant in practice all week. It just sounds like they're just not ready to elevate him to the active roster. Guys are basically allowed to practice for about 3 weeks once you open up that window before, you declare if they're coming back or not. So we'll see about Trice. Obviously, I think he could potentially factor into some of their plans down the road and the down packages as well. But this is also a little bit of an audition for guys like Cam Sutton, from some of these other guys that are getting some playing time just to see, what they want to do down the stretch. And I think that this game will definitely play into that some. From the Brown side of things, they aren't as healthy on their end, but still like a lot of guys that were full participants, limited participants in practice this week. The big guys that are out, Jedrick Wills, their left tackle, he's been kind of in and out of the lineup, hasn't been very good when he's played, but they had to make some moves. They're basically down to their third string guy. They put DeJuan Jones on IR this week. They signed Jerron Christian, former third round pick out of Louisville, actually. And it's kind of interesting. The Steelers played Christian twice last year, but for different teams. He started against them in the Texans game. I think it was week 4 of last year. And then the second Steelers-Browns matchup, he started in that game as well. So he's not necessarily new to this rivalry or anything like that. He was okay in those games. I actually don't think he was charted with the pressure in either one. So we'll see if he actually comes in and gets the nod. He was signed midweek. So I'm not sure if he's going to start or not, or if they'll roll with someone else. Jack Conklin's the guy that's going to be starting on the right side of the offensive line for them. But nothing really other injury related other than obviously we got a quarterback change on the other side of the ball. No Deshaun Watson, insert Jameis Winston. Steelers, last time I checked, I think they're a 3.5-point favorite in this one, but they've never actually won. Some crazy stats, honestly, man. They've never actually won a Thursday night primetime game on the road versus a divisional opponent in the Mike Tomlin era. They're surprisingly 0-7 in those games. Shout out to our Steelers now beat writer, Alan Saunders. He came up with that stat, and I thought it was really interesting. Something that I kind of noted early in the week as well, they've also lost 4 or 5 in Cleveland, the last of which was kind of the last straw in the final. In the old Matt Canada era, I think that we could probably thank the Browns in some form or fashion for that because, greener pastures lied ahead. Steelers end up making the playoffs. But, I think having to travel on a short week is always really difficult. The road teams are typically not very good on Thursday Night Football. Thursday Night Football doesn't usually bring us very entertaining or very high quality games for the most part, for obvious reasons. But, if you've watched both of these teams this year and you really paid attention to the Browns, the Steelers are the better team. full stop. There's not really any way to sugarcoat it other than that. And we'll kind of get into some of the reasons why, but kind of want to start talking just a little bit about the Browns offensively and what they're kind of doing with Jameis Winston now at quarterback. I think speaking of kind of good things I think that have happened, Deshaun Watson injury, I think him going down has actually been a good thing for their offense. I think over the first, however many weeks of the season, they looked pretty lifeless. They had no identity. There was just like basically a group that was kind of just sleepwalking week to week. And I think that Jameis, far from a perfect quarterback, probably not a guy that you really want to have as your starter, but like ideally, like he does offer you a little bit of competency. And I think you've seen that with Winston at quarterback. The Browns are 23rd in EPA per play, 22nd in success rate. So still not very good, but they've actually been like somewhat watchable and a little bit more fun. I think the biggest difference between the two quarterbacks has just been the aggressiveness under center. You look at some of Winston's numbers, just like 10.9 average depth of target. That's one of the highest marks in the league. He's pushing the ball down the field vertically a lot. They're running a lot of shot plays from under center, things that Watson wasn't necessarily all that comfortable with, but he's also getting the ball out much quicker than Watson. 2.57 time to throw. Now, listen, full stop. Those numbers can sometimes be a little deceiving, but Winston has tried to get rid of the ball a little bit quicker this year, which has been a good thing for them. Having said that, there have been some flaws in Winston's game that have kind of shown up just over the past three starts or whatever of his. And it's really just been the turnover worthy plays. Like even the games in which he played pretty well and made some good things happen. You saw them beat Baltimore. I think it was week 8 in his first start. They ended up like putting like 29 points on the board. Winston did a lot of good things in that matchup. Like he hit David Njoku in the red zone with a nice back shoulder touch play to score a touchdown. He made some plays out of structure. He pushed the ball down the field into tight windows. He did some good things in that matchup. Having said that, he also had 3 turnover-worthy plays in that game, and the Ravens just couldn't catch the ball. So, like, that's the thing is that Winston's always going to give you opportunities for takeaways. He's got 7 turnover-worthy plays over the past 3 starts. That's just kind of always been the book on him, that he's just prone to negativity. Like, he's going to have some, like, A-plus moments, and he's going to have some F-minus moments. And for a Steelers defense that kind of thrives off taking the ball away, they forced 3 turnovers last week against the Ravens. They're going to have plenty of opportunities to do that again against Jameis Winston in this offense. Even if I do think that Winston gives them a better shot to win than a guy like Deshaun Watson or that version of Deshaun Watson did. Now, speaking of the offensive line, though, like Winston has been sacked a ton despite getting the ball out quickly. I think most of that's really been the result of the offensive line. I actually think that there have been moments where he's kind of mitigated some pressure quite nicely, even though I don't think that that's necessarily a strength of his. Joe Bitonio, their left guard, is probably their best player, still a solid player at this stage of his career. But like Wyatt Teller, their other guard on the right side, completely fallen off a cliff this year. Like doesn't look like the same player, in my opinion. The tackle situation has been a disaster all season long. I already mentioned that they're going to be without Jed Wills, without DeJuan Jones. Those two are kind of the guys that they thought they would have as their kind of bookend tackles opening up the season. Because of injuries and neither one of those guys playing very well, it's been pretty much a revolving door and some struggles on the perimeter. So Pittsburgh's going to have a huge advantage up front in this one. The Steelers top 10 in pressure rate. We haven't seen them like have that huge breakout sack performance where they get after the quarterback like 5-6 times, but that is absolutely within the cards this week for the Steelers. Just in terms of like matchups across the board, like TJ Watt is going to have a matchup against Jack Conklin. Conklin is a guy that Watt has faced in years past, whether he was with the Titans or what have you. But you just look at like some of the sacks that Jameis has kind of dealt with just over the past couple of weeks. I think that they're going to have an opportunity to press the pocket, whether it's on the interior, whether it's on the exterior. The Chargers 2 weeks ago got after Winston. They sacked him, I think, 6 times. I think he was sacked 3 times last week against the Saints pass rush that have been like relatively lifeless throughout most of the season. And then even like in the run game, I don't necessarily think that. I think usually like when I used to think of like how this Browns team like to operate with a lot of like outside zone mixed with a lot of like pin and pull gap stuff as well, with a bunch of pullers and getting their athletes out in space. I just don't see the same level of play, like from a traits perspective, from an athleticism perspective that I'm used to with this offensive line. And I know they've underwent some coaching changes and stuff up front, and that probably has something to do with it. But the good news for them is that they do get Nick Chubb back. He's been playing over the last couple weeks, kind of still working his way back into form. Of course, there's going to be some emotion involved. I would expect from the crowd more than anything else, just with the circumstances involving the injury last year. People acted a fool with the whole Minka situation, what have you. But I thought that last week versus the Saints, when I went back and watched the film, that was the best that he's looked really all season long. I think he had like 50 something rushing yards, averaged over 5 yards a clip. The leg drive looks like it's returning. He's pushing the pile. His vision really stood out to me. That's one thing that's always made Chubb like such a dynamic player is the creases that he can set, the creases that he can find, the cutback lanes that he can find, but also like he's setting guys up in the hole. He's a really good back in terms of like keeping his shoulders square, not declaring his intentions too early. He finishes runs with power. He still lacks like the explosion I'm used to kind of seeing with him in the open field, which is obviously understandable considering, you know, him returning back from that injury, but he's no slouch. I expect him to be like really amped up for this game. They're going to lean on him quite a bit if they can, especially with the weather being what it may be. And I expect, him to really be the Steelers like priority number one in terms of like trying to shut him down offensively. They've had some receivers step up as well, just with Winston, giving them some life in the passing game. The emergence of Cedric Tillman has been noteworthy. Tillman was a guy out of Texas that I was actually higher on than the consensus. He pretty much did like literally nothing for the first year and a half of his career. And I was sitting there thinking like, okay, like maybe I just missed on this evaluation and he's a draft bust for me, whatever. But really since the Amari Cooper trade, which is about 4 weeks ago, he's been 7th in receiving yards. He scored 3 times in 4 games. He's kind of this bigger body throwback X type receiver. He's made a lot of plays for them and he's kind of coming into his own pretty quickly. So we'll see. I think that Joey Porter Jr. is going to have probably have his number most of the game. I would anticipate that that's the guy that they'll probably target. We'll see though. They do have Jerry Jeudy. They traded for him in the offseason. He's kind of this like route runner, explosive play guy. He had an 89-yard touchdown on a crosser last week that he kind of ran away from man coverage, caught the ball, and he ran like 70-some yards after the catch, ended up scoring against the Saints. So I like to use him a lot out of the slot. Elijah Moore caught a deep ball last week versus the Saints, but that was more of like an out of structure play against like some cover 2 stuff. But, probably the best like player that they have all around is probably David Njoku, who's a really solid blocker, can be an inline guy, but also be a dynamic player with the ball in his hands. He can stretch the field vertically, come down with contested catches. I already talked about the one that he had against Baltimore a couple weeks ago. He's had some good games against the Steelers in recent memory too, man. Like he's had over 40 yards in 4 straight of these games. I think he had 15 targets or something like that in a game last year. So they clearly like going to him in this matchup. He scored twice. He had a huge game on Thursday Night Football against this defense 2 years ago, if you recall. I believe that was that on Thursday Night Football? But I just know he had 2 red zone touchdowns that he caught from Brissett in that game. So, this offense, like it's more competent than it was under Watson, but still like really struggling to score points from basically any metric that you look at. In terms of like the defense, the Browns, this is like one of the more underachieving units in the entire NFL, in my opinion. The Browns 20th in EPA per play, they're 7th in success rate, 13th in points per drive. So it's really like an average-ish unit, more than like the statistically dominant one that we saw last year. They were pretty much like first in most categories. They aren't forcing many turnovers this year either. I think they've got 7 takeaways. It's like 30th in the NFL in takeaway. But this is still like your typical Jim Schwartz defense. Luckily for me, on a short week, didn't really have to get refamiliarize myself with very many wrinkles because like what you see is what you get. They're going to get after the quarterback. It's a 1-gap attacking style front. They're going to play tight man coverage on the back end. Only the Lions are playing cover 1 at a higher rate than the Browns are right now. Similar to Pittsburgh, they don't disguise their coverage much pre-snap. What you see is what you get. They will run some NTTs, some non-traditional Tampas, but they're not very good, in my opinion, when they try to use zone coverage. Their cover 2 spacing, when you extend the play versus them, it almost looks like they kind of lose their minds. They don't strap up to receivers and the scramble drill very well either. They'll give up some chunk plays as a result. Out of that stuff, they've had some coverage busts that have resulted in some explosive plays this year. They don't typically make Denzel Ward travel. He's having a great season. Huge year for him, honestly. Like his film is very, very good. Incredible footwork, speed, can really, really run. Technician impress. He can play off coverage. Beautiful pedal. Plays bigger than his size at the catch point. His size would indicate but like the only time he's really played on the right side of the defense this year was versus Washington, because that's where Terry McLaurin plays. So they don't really make him like travel side to side. So if you're looking to match up Hunt and you don't want George Pickens on him, or you're trying to get him on a more advantageous matchup, you could just put him on the left side of the offense, and he's probably going to be away from where Ward's lined up. So Greg Newsome's a slot corner that I really like, especially in coverage, but he's not much of a run defender, which we'll kind of talk about some of the numbers that may indicate that as the case. But Martin Emerson's another guy with a history with George Pickens. Those two kind of like went back and forth on social media last year. I don't think there's very much, that I don't think they like each other very much. I'll just say that. But Emerson's really struggled this year. 4 touchdown catches allowed, only 2 pass breakups. Teams have really targeted him. He got off to a really rough start at the beginning of the season. It's kind of stabilized a little bit, but he's a bigger bodied corner. I'd expect them to kind of go after him a little bit, just in a similar way that they went after Brandon Stevens last week. If you noticed against Baltimore, a lot of their shot plays and stuff like that were towards the left side of the boundary. That's where Stevens kind of aligns. But the safeties, in my opinion, particularly Juan Thornhill, haven't been very good this year at all. Lack of effort has been a huge talking point within the Cleveland media circles, but you see it on film. Like, neither one of their safeties really look like they want to tackle anybody. There are definitely some times where you'll see them jogging on film. I think that's a huge red flag, especially in a divisional game like this. It's probably going to involve a lot of run plays and asking those guys to come up and tackle. When you're talking about the Cleveland defense, though, it really like starts and ends really with Myles Garrett. No surprise, but he's having another great season. Time for the NFL lead with 26 quick pressures. Next Gen Stats classifies a quick pressure and like whether you're getting pressure with less than 2.5 seconds. He's tied with Danielle Hunter for the NFL lead in that category. Over half of his pressures have come on third down chances. So it's really important to make sure like that you're staying out of third and long situations. There should never be a time in this game where you're asking either of the offensive tackles to get into these like true pass set one-on-one situations on an island. The Steelers tried to do that a couple times last year. He made them pay. He had a big game in that second game of the series last year. I think he had multiple sacks, like 5 or 6 pressures. You just cannot let this dude wreck the game under any circumstance. Like, you could do some things to try to minimize him, send chip help. You can try to get into some play action stuff. If you do like the boot actions and stuff like that, you can try to boot away from him, make him less of a factor in the play. But just no one-on-ones, please. Use Washington to kind of help out in that regard. Make sure the backs are really cognizant of where he's lining up. They typically are lining him up mostly on the right side of the defense this year. So he'll probably be over Dan Moore the majority of the time, but they have like done some like matchup hunting. I think it was like week 2 this season where they moved Garrett primarily over to the other side of the defense. So it's not like unheard of. They'll sometimes like put him over the ball as well in some of their 5-0 looks on third down. So that's something to watch out for. We'll see if they get into any of that. But other than that, you just got to know where you're at. Got to make sure you block him. He's kind of the really key force in a pass rush that has been pretty good this season. They're top 5 or 6, and I think their second pressure rate, like 6th in sack percentage or something like that. So they are going to be without Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, their inside linebacker, this week, probably for the foreseeable future. It sounds like pretty serious injury for him. Sounds like his long-term like playing future's potentially in doubt as well. So prayers up to him, but they also struggled, really mightily without him. Like, you look at like the Saints game last week. I can't even believe like the stat when I wrote it down, and I had to go back and watch the runs again because I was like, did he really run for this many yards? 138 yards on 7 carries, 3 touchdowns for Taysom Hill last week against the Browns. So, yeah, I mean, there was most of those were quarterback design runs. So you can probably expect to see some Justin Fields involvement in this game, especially if the weather in the wind kind of takes away some of the stuff that they want to get to in the passing department. Fields, they finally showed the Justin Fields like running package last week. I think he was on the field 3 plays. I think all of those 3 plays were deemed successful. So, getting him out there in running situations, potentially in the red zone, would be a good idea in this matchup alone. Like I said, there are ways to get after this Browns team when it comes to like running the ball. You use draw plays. Anytime you're facing aggressive fronts like this, draws. They've ran a little bit more trap this season. So trap, crunch, anything like that to take advantage of some aggressive guys trying to get up the field. The Browns are also the league's worst team defending the run versus 11 personnel. Kind of an interesting thing that I saw statistically. 6.2 yards per carry. Teams just haven't really done it a lot. I think they've only seen like the the third least carries out of that personnel grouping. So the Steelers don't play a lot of 11 personnel. They try to typically live in that like 12, 13 world with multiple tight ends on the field. But, maybe that's a tweak or maybe a counter that they go to, if they start off the game slow with their original rushing attack, however they want to attack them, maybe they counter and get a little lighter in their personnel, try to get some lighter boxes, things like that, because of Cleveland's kind of propensity to play that very like single high middle field close, stack the box kind of approach. Something else that the teams haven't really done a lot against the Browns is play action. So they're also allowing the fifth most yards per attempts in those setting, almost 10 yards per attempt. It's just difficult to get those like deep 5-7 step drops off play action when Garrett's on the field. So whenever he's off the field, it would be a good time to take advantage of that, take those shots down the field, try to see if you can take advantage of those linebackers, get some of those deep crossers on a lot of that man coverage that they like to play. Just some more notes in terms of like where Pittsburgh kind of needs to be better in this one. They need to be better offensively in this one, point blank. They were not very good last week. Defense kind of bailed them out in that regard, especially with the weather conditions being nasty. You want to run the ball more efficiently, but also stay more diligent in that regard. I thought they got too drop back heavy, too much shotgun last week against the Ravens. I understand that the Ravens came in with a struggling pass defense, but they didn't have very much success at all throwing the ball last week, and they just kind of kept at it. Even though the game was really close, they didn't. They just got away from like what I think or what I want, what I feel like is their best identity going forward, which is a lot of under center, being like really run heavy, use the play action game off of that. Obviously, have to be better in the red zone. They're 30th in the NFL right now. The Browns have struggled in the red zone. They're also the league's worst defense, I believe, in third downs. I have to look at that. But that's another area that they've got to be better at. I think they were like 4 for 16 on third downs, and then I think they were 0 for 4 in the red zone last week against the Ravens. I mean, that's quite simply not good enough. Excuse me, they're dead last in third downs on offense. They're fifth in third downs on defense, but they are 24th in both of those categories in the red zone this year. So that's something that you could potentially take advantage of. When the Steelers have lost these games in the past, it's really been turnover related. Like they've lost the turnover battle in those games. I think I mentioned like over the last like 5 matchups or whatever, I think they have like a -9 or a -10 turnover differential. So the Steelers have done a very good job. I know they've had a turnover, I think, in like 3 straight games now, but overall they've done a really good job protecting the ball this year. And it's like, now that they're forcing more turnovers, it's been a really advantageous situation for them. It's set them up a good field position. This is kind of the one way, like when you're clearly the better team in this regard from a talent perspective, this is like the one kind of equalizer. If like you don't capitalize in the red zone, you turn the ball over a lot, you get a stupid special teams advantage to the other team. But the Steelers have had the advantage in those areas throughout the season. So that's why I'm fairly confident that they'll be able to, stay in this one and pull away at the very end, just because they've been good in the areas that would typically cause teams like this to fail on a short week. But we'll see. But having said that, obviously Russ needs to be better as well. He's taking a lot of sacks. His pressure to sack ratio has been astronomically high over the past 3 weeks, despite not a ton of like pressure overall statistically. That's a key stat against this Browns unit. Like I said, they got to stay out of third and long situations, but the Browns, they convert pressures to sacks at a pretty high rate. So lot to look forward to. Should be a really interesting matchup. I'm expecting an old school AFC North kind of slugfest in this one, especially with the weather being what it is. But I do think that if the Steelers start strong, there's a very high potential. Like if they can get up double digits on this team and really get any point, I think the Browns really have the identity, especially on defense, just to kind of lay down a little bit. So I don't necessarily think that that's a unit that is on film looks like they're ready to kind of fight and get into a brawl for 4 quarters, but we'll see. Maybe we'll see if I'm right or if I'm wrong on that. But I appreciate you guys watching to the very end and your continued support for the channel. Just on your way out, if you stuck with me, please make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, drop me a comment and your score predictions, and enjoy the rest of your day. I will be back, we'll say Friday morning with the recap, considering the game probably won't be over till around midnight my time. So enjoy the game. Peace and love.